Every year I'm always growing tomatoes, right? No problem. But I'm always encountering the same problem, fungal blight. I've done a few videos on how I've been tackling it, and that actually has been working pretty good, but it's not enough. So in this video, I'm going to show you finally all of my tips, tricks on how I grow enough tomatoes for the entire year using some pretty creative ways. And also, I definitely found the final thing that's going to really tackle that fungal blight this year, and you'd be surprised what it is. I already did a video on it, and it's called JADAM sulfur. Let's go. What's going on, my plant peoples? I'm the ADHD gardener, where I use gardening, houseplants, and humor as a form of mental health therapy, and I am growing tomatoes. I have been getting a lot more organized over the years because I really want to, kind of get my stuff together. So right here, I have my tomatoes, but also I have some peppers back here. But I'm always encountering the blight. Now, if you've been growing tomatoes, or maybe you're even new to growing tomatoes, you inevitably will at some point possibly encounter the fungal blight. And that's a major problem when it comes to tomatoes, because if you know about the fungal blight, it will wipe out all of your tomatoes. And it spreads fast because it's a fungus, and it spreads through spores. I have a lot of tips for you. You may want to jump around in the video to see what is going to suit your needs. This was the area last year that I was growing a bunch of tomatoes right here in this row. But tip number one is do not grow tomatoes in the same spot as last year. You want to do crop rotation, because especially when you're dealing with the fungus blight and you do not want to grow in that very same space the following year. The blight actually stays in the soil for years. It'll be there for a long time. So that is why crop rotation is completely important. So I'm not doing them this year. I'm doing them over here on this side. Also in another spot on the other side of the garden. Given that the fact that the spores are already in the soil, it is definitely, inevitably going to creep up onto whatever plant that you're growing in this same spot. And if it's, some plants will not get affected, but if you are growing tomatoes in this section, it will get affected and you will get the blight all over again. So crop rotation is definitely important. When covering the soil, what you are doing is essentially avoiding a lot of the extra splashes that may come off of the ground. And if it has a bunch of fungal spores, it's going to reduce the amount of spreading of those very same spores. So that is why every year I'm using something to cover underneath the bottom of the tomatoes. The reason why you want to prune your tomatoes, especially when they're really, really close to the ground, is to reduce how many spores jump off from the rain and anything like that from the ground onto the leaves. And this is why, tip number two is so essential, because it helps, prevent a lot of the extra splashing of the spores once you cover the ground. So once you cover the ground and you do the pruning, you definitely even further reduce the amount of blight that's going to show up on your tomatoes. Tip number four is all about observation. We're going to be looking for any spare blight leaves that are infected on our tomato plants. As soon as you see them, you are going to yank them away. But what you're going to do is not touch your fingers to anything else that's not infected. You're going to use one hand that is going to be the dirty hand, is what we call it in the medical field. You have a clean hand and you have a dirty hand. The dirty hand is going to be the one hand only that you're going to be using to touch all of those blight infected leaves. You're not going to cross-contaminate, because again, that's how the fungal spores spread, and you don't want to do that at all. So you're going to have one clean hand to hold whatever you need to hold. The plastic bag that you're going to be putting those blight leaves in, or you're going to be just holding the plant in general. One clean hand, one dirty hand. You can't just pluck them and just leave them right next to it. Trust me, I've done that. Yeah, and that definitely did not work, and that definitely spread the fungal spores even more. So you have to completely remove any of those leaves out of your garden in general with your clean hand or your dirty hand, depending on how you're holding it. Hey, what are you doing, Chippies? Huh? Come on, go. Let's just say this is tip 5, because I completely forgot already what number I'm on. But the next one is determinates versus indeterminate tomatoes. You have indeterminate tomatoes, such as the San Marzanos, and I think the Roma tomatoes also do that too. Those are indeterminate. They will keep vining and they will keep growing, and they will also keep producing tomatoes for the entire season. If you plant them in spring, they'll go from spring, summer, fall, basically until the frost kills that tomato plant. The determinate ones are the tomatoes that only have a predetermined set time of growth. They're only going to give you a certain amount of tomatoes, and only but for a certain amount of time. So once those tomatoes start growing and you get them already, chances are it may die, or it may just not offer or give you any more tomatoes in the end. So you have to pick and choose which ones or which varieties that you're going to be using. The only problem is with the indeterminate tomatoes is that, man, you will really get hit with the blight, because for some different varieties of tomatoes, some of them are more susceptible to the blight than others. You know, you do have some varieties of tomatoes that are, you know, blight resistant, that you know, have a better chance of not developing the blight, but that also depends on the variety of tomatoes. Indeterminates have a tendency of getting hit more with the blight than the determinants. They still will get hit with the blight. This is why we're doing a lot of serious mitigation for the entire growing season, because a gal needs some tomatoes. This year, I decided to say, screw the indeterminates, screw the vining ones, and I'm gonna grow just determinants. And hopefully I picked some varieties that are a little less susceptible to the blight. Tip number 6 is propagation. Definitely, if you are growing indeterminate tomatoes, which means those, you know, plants keep on growing, you do not really need to do any sort of propagation unless you know that that plant is about to die, going to die, or is going downhill fast. This is where the propagation will come into play, and it would really save your tomato yields, because we're going to be putting in another plant. What I did was take off all the suckers of the tomatoes. I have another video for that one. I took all those suckers off and I put them in water. And from there, it's going to grow and develop some roots. And that means I already have another tomato plant that I can replace ASAP in case I have another dying tomato plant, you know, somewhere else. So every time I see a plant that's going downhill, every time I see a tomato plant that's not producing any tomatoes, I'm going to be swapping them out with another propagated piece. Tip number 8 is continuously growing more tomato plants. If you don't propagate, you can still just grow them. Now, depending on when you started growing these will give you, you know, the right time frame of when you're going to get tomatoes. So these have been going for a long time. Hello, Freddie, for making an appearance today. So if you don't propagate, you can actually still just grow some tomatoes, but not just any time of the season. You have to be growing them relatively soon after your first initial seed starting batch. So that means that by the time May comes along, you should already have another set of tomato plants just in case in the ready. If you don't use them or you don't need them, you could just put them in your compost pile. No, you know, no harm, no foul. This just secures more tomatoes are going to be growing just in case that blight decides to just wipe you out or something. Tip number 7 is planting tomatoes everywhere, literally everywhere. Just don't let them be growing in your garden. Why not grow them in your front lawn? Why not grow them on the side of the house? Why not grow them in containers? Why not grow them in the ground? Why not grow them in water? Just grow them everywhere, because the more tomato plants you have, the more higher probability that you'll be getting more and more tomatoes. So sometimes you just want to plant them everywhere. I don't see why you couldn't just plant them everywhere. Have you ever tried growing tomatoes in front of your house? Right now, I already have a bunch of tomatoes that are growing from last year out in the front. I never planted them. That was the beauty of it too. On top of that, sometimes you don't even have to actually plant the plant multiple years over. Sometimes you just need one plant, let that plant drop a few tomatoes in the ground, and you magically get friggin' tomatoes again next year. Look, I have like 3 tomato plants outside in the front. I never planted them out there. They were from last year, but yet the tomatoes dropped and they gave me more tomatoes. So why not just grow a tomato outside in the front? I'm very excited about tip number 9, and that has to do with get yourself a really good fungicide. When it comes to tomatoes and the fungus blight, that is definitely a fungal disease, and it is a very hard one to get rid of, let alone treat. Now, I have mentioned in previous videos about different ways of possibly tackling the fungal blight before, but I really came up with an even better solution, and I just stumbled upon it. It's called JADAM sulfur. I did a previous video on how I made this JADAM sulfur. I would really highly suggest, checking it out so you can make this concoction yourself. In the JADAM book, as well as Young Sun Cho's videos on how to make a lot of these solutions, he does mention anthracnose, which is basically a loose term for grouping a bunch of fungal diseases together. And he does say that the JADAM sulfur does work on anthracnose. And I actually commented on his video about making this, and I asked him, I said, will this work on fungal blight? And he said, yes, it will work on that. So guess what I'm doing? I'm spraying the crap out of my plants with this JADAM sulfur, and it actually seems to be doing something. It's still showing up, but then again, I have not been religiously spraying it. But I noticed that a lot of the smell, well, first of all, this does smell like sulfur. Okay, let's just get it right out of the way. This smells like sulfur, so you are going to be smelling rotting eggs all up in your garden. I have noticed that the bugs do not like this smell at all. So you will be seeing me in upcoming videos, especially when it comes to squash bugs and any other things that, creepy crawlies that are in the garden. I will be using this as well as another mixture from the book. But for now, this Jadam sulfur is specifically going to be for tomatoes. He does mention to spray this in the early morning when it's like, it still has dew on all of our plants. I have sprayed this in the afternoon and even in the fall time, and I saw nothing happening to the plants. I mean, like nothing bad. It has not burned the plants. It has not really curled. It does, basically this is a great solution. It has not done anything bad or harmful to the tomato plants at all. Now, I really want to be concentrating on spraying the stems. Also want to be concentrating on spraying the lower half of the, of the tomato plant. I can also see you, spraying on the top, but if you notice about anything about the fungal blight, that the blight starts from the bottom and then works its way up the plant. So I would start spraying with this on the bottom of the tomato plant, the stems, the leaves, and work your way up. If you put those methods plus a good fungicide that will kill this blight, or hopefully just really decrease or lessen the probability of blight killing your plants, then you're good to go. Word to the wise is that you are going to smell like eggs, okay? You are going to smell like eggs. So if you have to go to work, or if you have to go food shopping, or whatever the case may be, you may want to spray this in the morning and then possibly take a shower. Because Jose did say that I stunk like eggs the day that I was putting this together and started spraying the plants. He said, "What the hell is that smell? You stink." And I'm like, "Well, dude, what are you talking about? All I did was just spray sulfur." "Yeah, that's what you smell like, a big bag of rotten eggs." I'm like, okay. So I do spray, but then I also had to take a shower. This stuff has been working really good. I just need to be more consistent with it. Now, if I can do that, I'm thinking to spray at least maybe every, I'm thinking about spraying maybe once every 2 days, 2 to 3 days. I'm not really sure as to how much I'm gonna be spraying, but I know that once a week ain't gonna cut it. It's not. We all know about the fungal blight, and especially if it rains, it's really gonna be kicking up all those spores. So I'm assuming right after a rainfall, even before a rainfall, spray this. Number 10 is do not give up. I really don't want you to give up, and I know it can be hard, and I definitely know that deflating and that, crappy feeling of, man, I didn't do it. Oh my gosh, all this, my plants have died. They're all getting eaten up alive by the bugs and the blights and all this other crap. I don't want to garden anymore, or I just don't want to grow this tomato plant anymore. I would say just try it. Why not? If you already know that your plant may die or it's inevitably going to die, so then the initial shock factor of that plant dying, it's already gone. You already know it's going to die, so let's just assume that we're going to be experimenting with it. And then from there, the experimentation is, let's just, try to figure out what will work, what will not work, what will decrease the amount of blight, what will make it worse. This is all experimentation. And we should, kind of like be a little, I don't want to say be bummed or be happy about failure, but we learn through failure. You know what I'm saying? So it's not necessarily a bad thing to fail. What the problem is if you fail and you don't get back up. That's the true failure. Be brave, be courageous, and then just get to the experimenting. That's all it is. I don't want you to give up just because, we let the blight win. I don't think so. I am not letting anything else win. I'm going to keep going and going until I figure out this thing and I can get tomatoes for at least a good 7 to 8 months and canning. Hopefully. I really hope you enjoyed this video and you got a lot of tips and you got a lot of help with your tomato plants from this video. Let me know down in the comments below, what have you tried to tackle the blight? It's very hard, and I'm very glad that I found this Jadam sulfur, because to be honest, if this doesn't work or if this doesn't help, then you know what? I think I'm just ass screwed out. But that does not mean I'm going to give up on growing tomatoes. No. So this is going to be my best bet to tackle this and to help at least grow some sort of tomatoes. If you did enjoy this video and you want to show me some love, then don't forget to smash that like button. I really appreciate it. It does help YouTube push me up in the algorithm of the YouTube world. Also, if you haven't already, then consider subscribing. I drop a video twice a week. And you can also catch me on Facebook and Instagram. You can drop me a message if you have any plant questions, or if you just want to like show me your garden. That would be awesome. Until the next episode of you guys, where you and me both are going to be growing our happiness one plant at a time, one day at a time. I'll check y'all later in the next episode. Peace and love.